It happened during the peak of a brutally hot summer, the kind of day when tensions simmered and the city pulsed with restless energy. That was when the eviction notice showed up, not with a knock or a phone call, but stuffed coldly under a weathered door, curling at the edges like it was ashamed of itself. But what happened next didn't follow any normal trajectory. Because this wasn't just some tenant being tossed out of a unit, this was something far stranger, far more calculated. And when it all unraveled, people weren't just stunned. They were terrified of how wrong they had been. It began in the quiet corner of a gentrified neighborhood, a place that had slowly been polished of its history until it gleamed like something it never was. In Unit 3B of the Monroe Building lived a black single mother named Janessa Hill, a reserved woman in her early 40s with deep brown eyes that had clearly seen more than they ever said. She wore pressed blouses, simple slacks, and carried herself like someone who didn't beg for anything, but didn't threaten either. Her two adult children, Maya and Tyrell, both in their early 20s, came and went quietly, respectful to neighbors, never causing a stir. And yet, the landlord, Greg Latham, had it out for them. No one knew exactly why. Maybe it was how calm Janessa was when she answered his abrupt inspection visits. Maybe it was how she never flinched at his snide remarks about falling behind, even when she paid rent early. Or maybe it was because Greg, with his slicked back hair and rumpled business shirts, hated what he couldn't control. He called it a business decision when he posted the 30-day eviction notice, said he was renovating the space and needed compliance across the board. But when Janessa's polite question about relocation assistance was met with laughter, something shifted in the building's energy. The old couple downstairs said they saw her smile, but not the warm kind. It was the kind of smile that said the game just changed. Greg thought nothing of it. He was proud of his string of reclaimed properties and often boasted about how he cleaned up neighborhoods. He wasn't worried about Janessa. She was just another case, another file to archive and forget. But then things got weird. The guy he hired to remove her furniture called to say the movers refused to go in, not because she was home, but because the locks wouldn't budge, even with the right keys. He shrugged it off, told them to come back the next day, but when they did, the same thing happened. The locks hadn't been changed, they just wouldn't open. No resistance, no jamming, just nothing. As if the apartment was sealed from within by something stronger than metal. And that's when Greg noticed that his access code didn't work anymore either. Not just for her unit, for the whole building's security system. He tried to reset it. The panel flashed red, then it blinked off entirely. The security tech he called said the code base had been rewritten, but there was no record of who had done it. Not possible, the tech muttered, squinting at the screen. It's like someone with high-level clearance rewired your entire system remotely. That night, Greg stayed in his office past midnight, digging through tenant files, lease agreements, digital logs, anything. But Janessa's file was gone, just gone. It wasn't misplaced. It had been wiped, like she was never a tenant at all. Then he checked the payment history. Every rent check from Janessa Hill had been auto-deposited through a corporate account he didn't recognize. The name of the account? Dominion National Holdings. That didn't sound like any tenant support group. He looked it up. Nothing. But the routing number was tied to a powerful trust in Washington, D.C., one flagged as confidential in multiple databases. Greg started to sweat. The next morning, the eviction was supposed to go through. He showed up with a clipboard and 2 private security guards, determined to get her out personally. But as they stepped into the hallway of the 3rd floor, the elevator suddenly shut down behind them with a loud clang. The lights flickered, and the hallway camera he'd just had installed sizzled, sparked, and died on the spot. Still, they pushed forward. Greg pounded on the door of 3B. "Janessa Hill, open up! You're being evicted!" But when the door swung open slowly on its own, there was no one there. Just the smell of jasmine and steel. The guards entered first, calling out. Nothing. No furniture, no pictures, no signs of life. Just a pristine, untouched space filled with eerie silence. "She's gone," one of them muttered. But then the door slammed shut behind them and locked. They pulled. Nothing. Kicked. Nothing. The lights dimmed. Greg's phone buzzed. One notification. It was a picture of him, standing outside her apartment. But it had been taken from inside. The timestamp was from 5 minutes before they arrived. Greg dropped the phone, and then a voice echoed from the smart speaker mounted on the wall. Calm, female, controlled. "You made this personal, Mr. Latham. Now it's my turn." He screamed at the speaker, demanded answers, but the voice ignored him. One of the guards pulled his gun. That's when the floor vibrated. Just a little. Enough to make them all freeze. And from the hallway they heard the unmistakable sound of the building's main entrance locking down. Bolts, steel, reinforcement. The building was in lockdown mode. But how? Greg had never activated anything like that. He wasn't even sure it had that feature. The voice returned. "Dominion National Holdings, thanks you for your cooperation." He yelled again, "Who the hell are you?" But there was only static. And then, doors unlocked. They bolted out, made it to the street. He turned to look back, and the windows of Unit 3B were pitch black, like no light had ever touched them. The next day, a government vehicle pulled up outside the building. 3 people in black suits entered. They didn't speak, just walked straight into Unit 3B. A few minutes later, they left. One of them paused and looked directly at Greg. "You'll receive a package in 2 days," he said. "Read it carefully." Greg tried to follow them, but they disappeared down the street like ghosts. 48 hours later, a white envelope showed up under his door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a photograph. It was Janessa, in full military uniform. Medals he didn't recognize lined her chest. And in the corner, stamped in red ink, "Classified, Intelligence Strategic Operations Command." Below that, a single line. "Former Commander, Psychological Defense Warfare Division." Greg nearly dropped the photo. He flipped the page over. Another line. "Cover identity compromised." Mission concluded. Observation terminated. And suddenly everything made sense. The blank rental history, the encrypted payments, the rewired system. Janessa Hill hadn't just been a tenant. She'd been monitoring something. Or someone. Possibly even him. But why? He drove to city records, tried to pull the property history. There was no record of a lease ever signed by her. The previous tenant was listed as unknown. He visited neighboring properties, asked about her. No one remembered seeing her move in. They only remembered the smell of jasmine. And her eyes. Eyes that never blinked when you talked to her, as if she already knew what you were going to say. Greg started seeing things after that. Faces in his security cameras that weren't there in person. Files on his laptop changing names. Tenants moving out without notice. When he tried to sell the building, no buyers called back. One email he received simply said, "Do not interfere. You were warned." But that's not where it ends. Because someone new just moved into Unit 3B, a young black woman in her 20s. Short, natural curls, piercing eyes, no furniture yet. But she's been seen talking to the walls, whispering, smiling that same smile Janessa had the day she was evicted. And Greg? He hasn't left his office in days. His phone keeps buzzing with messages from unknown numbers. All they say is, "She's not gone. She's waiting." 2 weeks had passed since Greg Latham received the envelope. 14 days since he'd seen that classified photo of Janessa Hill, if that was even her real name, in full military uniform, flanked by seals and insignias he'd never seen before. Every night since, his phone buzzed at exactly 3:03 a.m. with the same cryptic message. "She's not gone, she's waiting." It wasn't just paranoia anymore. Greg's hands shook constantly. His appetite vanished. He stopped going to the gym. The world outside the Monroe building blurred, irrelevant compared to the pressure brewing inside its walls. He'd tried calling the Department of Housing, the mayor's office, local police, but his name was flagged in every system. Nobody picked up. One officer had called back once, just once, to whisper, "Let it go. Trust me. Whatever you did, just let it go." But Greg couldn't. Something deeper than fear gripped him now. Guilt? Shame? Maybe. But more than anything, it was that maddening need to understand. Who was she? Why here? Why his building? And who was the new woman now occupying Unit 3B? She'd moved in silently. No lease, no U-Haul, no paperwork. Just showed up one morning wearing dark jeans, a black hoodie, and eyes that froze the front desk clerk in place. Her name, according to the new building log, was Nova. No last name. Every night, Greg would watch from the security monitors as she paced her apartment slowly, deliberately. Sometimes she'd speak out loud. Sometimes she'd just stand at the window, staring out with that unreadable expression. And every now and then, she would turn and look directly into the camera, not at it, into it, as if she could see him watching. On the 15th day, Greg decided he couldn't take it anymore. He stood outside Unit 3B at midnight, hands trembling, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a folded printout of Janessa's photo in the other. He knocked once. Silence. He knocked again. The door opened before he could finish his third knock. Nova stood there barefoot, calm, expressionless. She looked in her 20s, but her eyes were ancient, like someone who'd read classified files before she learned how to tie her shoes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth, but with an undertone of power Greg couldn't place. I want to know what's going on. Who you are, who she was." Nova tilted her head slightly. "You evicted her." "I didn't know!" Greg snapped, the words spilling out. "I didn't know she was military. I didn't know she was anyone important. She was quiet. Paid on time, and I wanted to renovate. I didn't mean anything by it." "That's the problem," Nova said quietly. "You never mean anything by it." Greg blinked. "What does that mean?" She stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated. "I'm not going to hurt you, Greg. You're already hurting yourself just fine." The apartment was different. Sparse, but not empty. No couch, no TV. Just a black table in the center of the room and an old filing cabinet in the corner. But on the walls were blueprints, building schematics, maps, surveillance stills of him. She motioned to a chair. Greg sat down slowly, heart hammering. Nova remained standing. "You want the truth?" she said. He nodded. She walked over to the filing cabinet, pulled open the bottom drawer, and retrieved a manila folder marked Operation Glasshouse. She dropped it on the table and slid it toward him. Greg opened it. Inside were photographs, dated years back. Black and white images of Monroe Building's basement, then a tunnel, then crates being smuggled through the tunnel. Then, Greg's heart stopped. Himself, younger, shaking hands with a man wearing a black suit and a military ID badge. "I don't remember this," he whispered. Nova nodded. "You were compensated handsomely to forget. A shell company bought the building before you took ownership. The handshake? That was a handoff. You weren't supposed to ask questions, but you started renovations too early." Greg shook his head. This makes no sense." "Of course it doesn't," Nova said. "It wasn't meant to." She walked over to the far wall, tapped one of the blueprints. "Below this building are 5 sealed compartments. They were used decades ago to house classified tech, prototype surveillance systems, quantum networking nodes, and one thing you were never supposed to find." Greg felt like the floor was tilting. "What did I find?" Nova turned to face him. You found the one thing the agency never recovered from that facility. A black woman who knew exactly how to manipulate every tool they buried down there." Greg swallowed hard. "Janessa?" Nova nodded. "She was more than an operative. She was an architect, the system that locked you in, the camera that recorded you, the voice that spoke through the smart speaker. That was all her. Her design, her rules." He felt sweat trickle down his spine. "So what was she doing here?" "She was waiting," Nova replied. "Watching, monitoring you, monitoring everyone who came through this building. You weren't her target, not at first, but then you made yourself one." Greg slammed the folder shut. "Why not just come out and tell me? Warn me? I would have..." "You would have what? Apologized?" Nova asked, suddenly sharp. "You evicted a black woman without a second thought. You ignored the fact she'd been respectful, private, consistent. You saw her as nothing, so you treated her like nothing. That's why you were chosen." Greg stood now. Chosen for what? To be a lesson. Nova walked over to the window, looked out into the night. "You're not the first landlord to abuse power, but most don't get followed. Most don't get files opened on them. Most don't end up in operations folders." Greg stepped toward the door, panic rising again. "What do you want from me? What happens now?" She turned and faced him slowly. "You're going to lose this building." "What?" "By next week, city records will show a transfer. Your name will vanish. Your accounts will freeze. You'll be investigated for tax fraud. You'll be connected, very publicly, to the same black market operation that used these tunnels years ago. You won't be arrested. That would be too easy. You'll just become one of those men with no credibility. No property, no reputation, no platform. People will say, 'Didn't he used to own a few buildings?' And then they'll forget." Greg backed into the door. "This is insane." Nova stepped closer. "No, this is justice." She reached into her hoodie pocket and handed him a photo. It was of Janessa, but this time she was smiling. Not the mysterious kind. A genuine, joyful smile. She stood in a field, arms around Maya and Terrell. Behind them, a sleek government complex with a Dominion national seal. "She's fine," Nova said. "Better than fine. She retired. She passed the torch to me." Greg looked down at the photo, then back up. "I'm not a bad person," he whispered. "You're just not a careful one," she said. "And in our world, that's worse." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Nova opened it. Two men in suits entered silently, nodded at her, and then at Greg. "Time to go," one of them said. Greg was escorted down the stairs, not out the front, but down to the basement. The air grew colder with each step. The walls changed from painted concrete to rough, unmarked stone. "What is this?" "You've lived above it for years," one of the men replied. "It's time you saw what you were sitting on." They reached a steel door sealed with a biometric lock. One of the men placed his palm on the panel. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a massive underground chamber. Cables, blinking consoles, empty pods lined along the walls. And in the center, a circular dais with one object hovering above it. A black cube, slowly rotating, pulsing faintly. "That's not possible," Greg breathed. Nova appeared behind him. "This was the heart of the system Janessa built. A eye defense node, autonomous intelligence, capable of overriding any digital system in a 20-mile radius." Greg turned to her. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you tried to own a building," Nova said. "But what you really owned was a weapon." She motioned to the two men. "Take him back upstairs. Give him until morning." The next day, the Monroe building was empty. Every tenant gone. Every file erased. Every trace of Greg Latham removed from the city's ownership logs. He tried to file complaints, lawsuits, news tips. No one responded. Journalists laughed. Lawyers hung up. His name was flagged. His bank accounts closed. Credit destroyed. And Nova? She stayed. 3B's window always glowed faintly at night now, and if you stood outside and looked up long enough, you'd sometimes see her silhouette, calm, watchful, patient. One night, weeks later, a new tenant approached the building and rang the buzzer. A woman answered. Her voice was calm, smooth, measured. "This building isn't accepting new tenants right now, but thank you for your interest." The buzzer clicked off, and from behind the window, Nova watched. Because Monroe wasn't just a building anymore, it was a warning, and Justice had a new address.